All right, today we're diving into a really profound and, let's be honest, pretty challenging idea from the 16th century theologian John Calvin. It's all about how we measure up, not against each other, but against this ultimate standard of divine justice. So let's dive right in.
So, let me just start by asking you a question. How would you fare in the ultimate courtroom? I'm not talking about a human court, with all its human rules and flaws. I mean a divine one. It's a heavy question, right? But Calvin argues that our answer to it changes absolutely everything. And this gets us to our first big idea. Calvin says that before we can even start talking about things like righteousness, we have to understand the court we're being judged in. It's not about our little human-sized yardsticks. It's about God's perfect heavenly tribunal. See, the whole point here is that we're not talking about being a good neighbor or a decent person by society standards. This is the ultimate final judgment. In fact, Calvin points out that the people who are most confident in their own goodness are usually the ones who've given the least amount of thought to just how terrifyingly perfect God's justice really is. To really get a sense of this standard, Calvin paints this incredible picture using scripture. He asks us to imagine a brightness so intense, so pure, that in its presence, the stars themselves just go dark. That's the baseline for divine purity we're dealing with here. And it's not just about purity, it's also about sheer, overwhelming power. He describes a strength so immense it can literally melt mountains. I mean, the entire physical world, in all its grandeur, is just nothing before this judge. And here is the final, just staggering piece of the picture. A righteousness so perfect, so absolute, that not even angels can fully stand up to it. So if they fall short, what chance does any human really have? So the implication here is pretty much unavoidable. When you're standing before a judge this powerful and this pure, any attempt to bring forward your own list of good deeds just completely falls apart. According to Calvin, the only logical thing to do is confess your own total, complete nothingness. Okay, but here's where it gets even trickier. It's one thing to accept a really high standard. It's another thing entirely to accept that our own sense of being a good person might actually be an illusion. And this is where Calvin really challenges our everyday assumptions head on. Calvin uses this brilliant analogy to explain it. He says that comparing ourselves to other people, well, that's like looking at objects that are close by. Our vision is sharp, we feel confident in what we see. But trying to measure our goodness against God's, that, he says, is like staring directly into the sun. Your vision is just overwhelmed, you're blinded, and all that confidence completely vanishes in an instant. And this really drives home that massive gap between what we value and what God values. The very things we celebrate in ourselves and in others, our achievements, our morality, our social standing. Calvin argues, using scripture, that these things are seen as an abomination from a heavenly point of view. It's a total reversal of what truly matters. He gives us another powerful metaphor for this. Our self-righteousness, the goodness we think we have, it's like being rich in a dream. It feels so real, so valuable, we can build our entire identity around it. But the moment we awaken, the moment we stand before God's judgment, poof, it all vanishes, and we see it for what it was, a complete illusion. You can see this play out perfectly in the parable of the Pharisee and the publican. On the one side, you have the Pharisee, confidently listing off his resume of good deeds. He's totally righteous in his own eyes. And on the other side, you have the publican, who's so ashamed he can't even look up to heaven. He has no merits to list, just one simple plea: be merciful to me, a sinner. And in the end, who goes home justified? The publican. So if our best efforts are just dream riches, and even angels don't measure up, what in the world are we supposed to do? This brings us to the big turning point in Calvin's argument. It's a deeply paradoxical solution that completely flips our expectations on their head. First things first, we have to be super clear about what Calvin means by humility. This isn't just about being polite or modest. He's talking about something much deeper, much more raw, an unfeigned submission, a heart that is just completely stricken by the awareness of its own spiritual poverty and its desperate need for God. So how do you get there? Well, Calvin lays out this clear, if totally radical path. Step 1, completely forget about your own supposed merits. Just let them go. Step 2, you have to actively cast out all confidence in yourself. And the final step, you rely on one thing and one thing only: God's mercy. Calvin actually quotes an earlier theologian, Bernard of Clairvaux, to sum up this incredible paradox. He says, "Merit enough it is, to know that merits are not enough." Think about that. The only true merit a person can possess is the profound understanding that their own merits are worthless. It's in abandoning the whole search for worthiness that true worth is finally found. And this brings us to the final, crucial part of the whole argument. What's the point of all this? What actually happens when you become completely empty of your own self-righteousness? In other words, what's the outcome of this radical humility? Well, Calvin argues that this very emptiness is the whole point. It's the prerequisite for grace. Christ's purpose, he says, wasn't to come and reward the self-satisfied and the morally confident. His mission was for those who knew they were poor, who knew they were broken, who knew they were in need, the contrite of heart. And this is spelled out so clearly in the Gospels. Grace isn't a prize for the righteous. It's a rescue mission for sinners. You can only receive a gift if you know you need it. By thinking you're already righteous, you're basically closing the door to the very help that's being offered. So according to Calvin, there are two main things that block this grace from reaching us. The first is arrogance, that foolish belief that we're actually good enough on our own. And the second is complacency, just kind of being so comfortable in our brokenness that we don't even bother to seek help. But if you look at them, at their core, both are just forms of self-satisfaction. Ultimately, it all boils down to this simple, kind of inverse rule. The fuller we are of ourselves, the less room there is for God. Our self-satisfaction, whether it comes from our perceived virtue or our comfortable vice, is the main obstacle to receiving God's help. And so we end up right back where we started, with a question that gets to the very heart of Calvin's argument. If our own efforts to be good actually stand in the way, then what does it truly mean to seek grace? It's a paradox that challenges us to stop trying to earn what can only, at the end of the day, be freely given.